Nation, and welcome to the second breakout session, Tools, Processes, Policies that Aid Digital Transformation and Modernization. My name is Emily Jarvis, and I lead the events team here at GovLoop, so thanks so much for being with us today. And I want to take a moment and thank our sponsors, Atlassian, Carousel, Pluralsight, and Granicus for helping us put on this session today. So let's get to it because oh my goodness, has there been a lot of organizational change happening in government agencies, which means there is more work to do with less people to do it. And it's the old adage of doing more with less, except this one is hypersped. So what can agencies do to meet their mission objectives? So today you'll hear interviews we did over the past couple of weeks from government and industry experts. In those interviews, they will share the tools, processes, and policies that are changing to transform agencies and increase efficiency. But first, I got a few housekeeping items to go over. First things first, we've got some great additional resources for you in the download to download from the resources tab at the bottom of the screen, including this slide deck. If you're in need of that closed captioning feature, look for that show icons icon on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. We hope you don't have any technical difficulties, but if you do, send us a message to that Q&A tab and my colleague will get your questions answered. We also have the open chat available for you today, so don't be shy. We want to hear from all of you. And you can interact with all of your attendees on there. And don't worry if you miss anything, we'll email you a link to the entire event tomorrow, which will be sent directly to your inboxes. We're also giving out 1 CPE credit for your participation in today's session. There are 3 things you need to do to achieve that CPE credit. First things first, stay and participate for the entire session. Take all 3 polls. And third and finally, fill out the post-event CPE evaluation and we'll send you that credit. The polls will appear on your screen as a pop-up, and to select your response and click submit to send in your answer. You can find the CPE evaluation in the resource module on the console or in the resource center in the main NextGen environment. All CPEs will be emailed directly to you once we confirm you've met all of those requirements. And speaking of polls, we've got your first one up right now. We want to know, is your agency living the do more with less mantra? And while you make those selections, let me introduce you to our experts. Joining us this afternoon, we've got Natalie Buddha-Smith, who's the Director of Digital Strategy for the Digital Innovation Lab and Connecting Communities Digital Initiative within the Library of Congress. We also have Matthew Gravis, who's the Public Sector Chief Technology Officer at Atlassian, and he is also a former Chief Data and AI Officer at the U.S. Department of State. We've got Tony Holmes, who's the practice lead for solutions architect for public sector at Pluralsight, and Angie Peterson, who's the vice president for Granicus Experience Group. Thank you all so much for lending your time for these interviews. And to get the conversation started, I sat down with the Library of Congress's Natalie Buddha-Smith to talk all things digital modernization. Here's that conversation. Here to talk about all things modernization and digital transformation is Natalie Buddha-Smith. She is the Director of Digital Strategy in the Digital Innovation Lab and Connecting Communities Digital Initiative within the Library of Congress. Natalie, thanks so much for being with us.
Sure thing. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so there's this concept that is by no means new, and it's this concept of doing more with less. And I think a lot of agencies have been dealing with this literally for decades, if not centuries, right? Has there ever been enough money? But the things have really doubled down, let's say, recently, and there is a lot of emphasis on efficiency and modernization efforts, all with this goal of performing more with maybe less budget towards your goals here. So can you explain practically what some of this do more with less mentality means, and if you have any examples?
Sure thing. I so agree with you that federal staff have been needing to do more with less for a long time. And there are a lot of subject matter experts across the federal government, and they bring this expertise that is very unique, especially sometimes to their positions. But one thing that we're thinking of now is this concept of upskilling. And a lot of modernization efforts, if they include artificial intelligence or not, require upskilling because you're most often using technology in new ways. And the best way to do that upskilling is really on the job or on while you're implementing these new technologies. So thinking about if there is a modernization effort underway, how do you bring the staff that actually are going to be working with these tools, working with these technologies into the entire project from the very beginning as much as you can through communications or through gathering feedback, through gathering requirements, so that they are learning along the way. So by the time your modernization has rolled out, they are already moving forward with it, and it's not a entirely attached on training session. It's actually iterative and along the way. And actually, a lot of the modernization efforts are more effective when you get feedback from the staff that will be using it or supporting it as you're developing it.
That makes total sense to me, and I'm curious, that create needs a lot of planning, a lot of forethought to make sure that you're aligning the right skill sets to the right places, and while you're doing all of that, obviously, agencies have a mission to deliver. The IRS still has to collect
Mhm.
taxes,
Mhm.
the EPA has to keep our water clean, things like that. So what are some ways that agencies can better, let's say, achieve those missions while also going through these transformation efforts in whatever capacity that can be? Any
Right.
examples of how that could work?
Sure thing. One way that we do it here is through explorations or experiments or pilots before you start that full scale implementation. So really thinking about what is the core problem or what is the core effort that you need to make more effective, and how can you break that up into smaller pieces and then try an experiment or a pilot with a very small team that is focused on solving that problem in novel ways. And that can then help build momentum, and then you can bring in more and more, make the modernization program a larger effort by bringing in other parts of that. So really thinking through, how do you create, modularize it, or how do you break it down into iterations so that you can really build for momentum in smaller chunks and not really relying on an older frame of mind where you try to do as much as you can before you released it to the staff that might be using it or supporting it.
So talking about that staff specifically, the next gen audience is really widespread here. We've got folks who are brand new to government, we've got senior leaders and officials. So I it kind of begs the question, I think, sometimes when we talk about digital services, modernization efforts, transformation, whatever kind of buzzword we want to use in there, we can throw AI in for kicks and giggles.
Mhm.
It often sounds like we're talking about large systems, large programs, things like that. I'm curious from an individual perspective, what are some ways, if you were one of our attendees at today's session, what are some ways that employees themselves can look to, whether it's these new technologies or new processes, to really lean into that efficiency and productivity mantra?
Right. There's several best practices, new frameworks that are good starting points. We're talking a lot now about system design. So thinking in systems rather in discrete tactical problems, that it can be a good foundation. Agile development or agile approaches, as I mentioned before, how do you break a bigger problem down into smaller chunks and then really work on those smaller chunks to build the momentum. That's one way. There is so much great training that's free and online. And if you do have time in your day, in order to really spend time with that training, recommend, systems design, agile approaches. If you want to dip your toe into AI and how people are starting to utilize those tools, I highly recommend. There's some really great training out there to start and just um, build some curiosity. Curiosity is really, really important right now. It can be overwhelming, but taking a small step and asking curious questions can really, really help. And that will build not only confidence, but it will actually open up venues where you can learn more and bring those things back to the work that you're currently doing.
I think what you're talking about is so important, and I heard a TED talk recently about a person who was saying, in your career, you need to be powerfully vulnerable, and I was like, wait, what
Mhm.
does that mean? But their perspective was, if you're not out there asking questions, learning new things, you're not going to be able to grow, and that can feel very scary, right? Because as professionals, we want to be seen as experts in our field. This is why you hired me.
Mhm.
I'm good at this. Let's keep doing this. But if you don't do that or learn that, you're kind of stuck in this position, and things might move on without you. And so their take was kind of leaning into that curiosity thing that you're talking about, is putting yourself in positions where you can be powerfully vulnerable and say, I don't know how this works. Can you help me? Can you show me? Can you grow in that skill set? And I just love that concept.
Yeah, that's great. And that's what, if you are a more social person or you have affinity towards professional networks, for example, some of these concepts are overwhelming. And if you engage either online or in person, there's a lot of professional groups in the area in DC, you'll realize that sometimes we're all in the same boat. And some of these concepts are so large and so overwhelming that even those that are experts are maybe experts in a narrow part of it. And so there's a lot of room for learning and growth. And when you see other people expressing their vulnerabilities and asking questions, it really can help with your curiosity.
I love that. All right, so I only have a few more quick questions for you. And the first one is barriers and challenges, and I think we've hit on a little bit of the personal side. But I'm curious. I think anyone and everyone would say, I would love my government agency, my employee, my day-to-day job to be as efficient and as effective as possible. That makes clear-cut sense. The problems is that it's not as easy as just saying that. You have to implement new systems, you have to bring in new technologies, new processes, new training. So what are some of the top barriers that you see as agencies and employees themselves who are really leaning into this idea? Where are they running into pain points?
Right. And I liked how you mentioned that it is more than just technology. It's more than just modernizing the technology. It is fundamentally changing some of our core work. And so when you think about a process and think about using a new technology, that process may change dramatically. So there are a lot of facets to our mission work that is changing all at once. And sometimes they're not on the same schedule. It may be that the people engaged in the modernization efforts are moving at one speed while your ability to acquire a product, acquisitions may move at another speed. Your stakeholder buy-in from your senior management is moving at a different speed. And so that is really what makes it a challenge, is sometimes you need all of those things to move forward, and sometimes they're not moving forward all in the same ways or all in the same speed. So that is definitely a barrier and something to, try to wrangle. It is a challenge. And the other one is that I wanted to focus on is that a lot of the work that we do is so critical to our American citizens. There are some agencies out there where people really depend on these services. And so we have to get it right. And so in a way that's a barrier, but in a way it's a strength. And so a lot of times when we're delivering services, we have to be very, very thoughtful and make sure that we're getting it right, and which is it is a contrast to the private sector. If you're selling a product, you usually want to get to market as soon as you can, and it's really a competitive benefit to get out there and be 80% okay or 60% okay. When we're delivering life, dependent services, we have to get it right. And so our speed to market or our releasing services need to be more heavily considered. And so that is a barrier when you are often compared to the private sector, but it is a strength. We know that when we're releasing a service, it's going to do what we're promising that it does. And so that's another big consideration when you're trying to, implement these modernization efforts.
Yeah, you always hear in the private sector, go fast and break things. And it's like
Mhm.
you can't break the Social Security Administration, or your relatives aren't going to get the services that they need, and you can't do that in the same way. So I think that's fundamentally so critically important. So thank you so much.
It is important. And just to connect it back to earlier, that's why those pilots and those explorations or those experiments are so important,
Mhm.
especially if you have a smaller staff focus on a smaller part of the problem. They can take those risks and try to be at a speed that is much more accelerated than if you're delivering the service to the general public. And so how do you build those experiments in or those pilots in so that you can get some of that speed, but then have the ability to correct it before someone is dependent on it?
So if I'm listening to this today and I'm saying what Natalie's saying
Mhm.
makes sense, and I want to suggest maybe some of these opportunities or ways forward for my organization, what is one thing that you would tell employees that they can kind of do to help with these modernization efforts if perhaps they're not the ones, let's say, leading the effort?
Right. And I'll go back to curiosity
Mhm.
and going out there and seeing what are the latest methods and thinking through using system design, thinking through what is the ultimate outcome that your group or your team or your project is trying to reach, and how can you think through the process and maybe re-engineer processes and then contribute that to the team, contribute it to the project, and have discussions with people in order to bring people on the same page. So bringing that sense of curiosity, bringing that, learning what you're learning from these new ideas into your projects can really be helpful to everyone.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Before I introduce our next interview, I do want to note we are putting up our second poll question right now. And for this one, we want to know, what is your biggest barrier to transformation? Personnel changes, budget restrictions, lack of skilled workforce. There's a lot of answers in there. So take a look at those. All right, on to our next interview, because agencies must do things differently because there are fewer government employees around to do the work. But that is easier said than done. So, my colleague Candace Thorson sat down with Atlassian's Matthew Gravis to talk about how agencies can modernize their workflows and why that is essential to do so now. She asked him, where do agencies run into roadblocks on their workflow modernization journey? And here is what he had to say.
Yeah, so like nearly my entire career was about modernization, and every single agency is focusing on modernization. New leaders come in, they talk about their modernization agenda, or they have another fancy name like the innovation initiative or the reimagine the organization kind of thing. And there's definitely some roadblocks that are common across those initiatives for sure. And so a few that come to mind, like the first is leadership attention. You know, when people talk about resources, they talk about money, they talk about people. The resource people talk about the least is leadership attention, and it can be a blocker if you don't have top cover. The need for visible and consistent executive sponsorship is really important. I used to go to executives, not executives, but senior, super senior executives, like deputy secretary, secretary kind of level, and I would ask them a question like, "Are you willing to spend 4 hours a year modernizing your agency?" You know, and out of 3,000 hours, are you willing to spend 4 hours? Like, that's not too tall of an order, and it gets a little awkward to ask that question, but I think it gets to the point that when we're talking about leadership attention, we're not looking for them to join working groups and solve problems themselves. What we want them to be is visible in front of the workforce, so that the team that's leading the modernization knows that they have top cover. It's also super helpful in my experience as you're rallying people across a large organization to say, "Hey, I'm going to present and give an update to the deputy secretary. It's Friday. Would love to tell them that you're on board." Those kind of tricks of the trade are really valuable. So if you don't have that, it can be a major roadblock. Organizational silos are also major roadblocks. We all deal with them. Every agency has sub-agencies. Every office has divisions and every division has branches, right? Every company has silos. To me, the answer there is radical transparency. I mean, just really being transparent about what's going on. When I was at State, we used to send our product leaders, our program leaders that were driving the major initiatives, they would send on a Friday what we called a Friday roundup. And this Friday roundup would be a message that would go to not just the team doing the initiative, it would go to senior leaders all the way up to the deputy secretary. And you'd have 70, 80, 90 people on this message, and it would talk about all of the accomplishments of the week. It would celebrate the quick wins. It would spotlight employees who did amazing stuff, but it would also show roadblocks. Just super transparent. Like, here are the things that are preventing progress. And having that kind of visibility across an organization where super senior leaders are seeing what's happening with their modernization can really unlock speed in modernization. I think the third kind of major blocker that I've seen a lot of is agencies often underinvest in change management. I had a chance to learn that early in my career, and it paid off a lot in the more recent years, the higher up I went in government. I mean, if you take the rolling out of generative AI at the State Department, which we did over the last couple of years, we deployed State Chat, which is the AI chatbot in a sensitive but unclassified environment. And that initiative really was successful because, yes, we built some awesome technology, but we spent a ton of time on change management. And we're talking like training in different time zones across the globe because we have an 80,000 person global workforce. We're talking about recurring messages, surveys to get feedback, prompt analytics to curate role-based use cases for generative AI. And it paid off. It paid off in a big way. We're talking like savings of 10,000 hours a month kind of stuff. So I think those three big things, leadership attention and breaking down silos through radical transparency, I think having the change management as a priority, and then just like agile incremental transformation. It doesn't have to be this huge big bang thing. You can start small like we did in generative AI, prove it quickly, get feedback and grow it. And it's been cool to see, as I've been at Atlassian for the last few months, it's been cool to see the tool suite and the solution set that we have organized in a way that enables this kind of modernization.
Thanks so much, Candace and Matthew. I really appreciate you walking us through those roadblocks because it is so essential to understand the full scope of these challenges before you embark on the necessary modernization efforts. I really appreciate it. And before I introduce our next interview, I do want to note we are putting up our third and final poll question. And for this one, we want to know, what do you expect to see, or do you expect to see more innovation next year as compared to this year? And we'll give you a few seconds to take that poll. On to our next interview. Government employees themselves are at a major crossroads in government right now, and many employees are being asked to step outside their comfort zones and learn a new skill. My colleague John Monroe sat down with Pluralsight's Tony Holmes to understand why agencies need to modernize their employees too. Here is what Tony had to say.
I think state and local agencies are in something of a tug of war for talent right now. And part of the challenge is that they're losing ground. I think the private sector moves much faster. They tend to hire more quickly. They tend to offer bigger salaries and give more flexibility. I think while government agencies are slowed by difficult hiring cycles and more especially, I think, by the rigid job classifications and the rigid pay structures, it means that positions could sit open for quite some time, weeks or months, sometimes even longer. And I think piling more work on an already stretched workforce makes life difficult. I think at the same time, technology is moving more quickly than not just government can keep up with, but more quickly than even private sector can keep up with. If you think about it, with the advent of cloud, cybersecurity increases, artificial intelligence and automation, these aren't niche skills anymore. They're foundational. But instead of building these skills internally, many agencies are still stuck searching outside for external hires who check all the boxes in these rigid job descriptions I mentioned. I think there's also the aging workforce problem. Most government teams I speak to have pros with decades of experience, but they're getting close to retirement now and they're aging out of the system. And what's happening is critical knowledge is walking out of the door with them. So without structured ways to transfer these skills, for example, through cross-skilling and upskilling, agencies tend to be losing hard-earned expertise faster than they can replace it. So taking all this into account, where does this leave agencies? Well, it leaves them at a crossroads, I guess, where the demand for cloud literate, AI savvy, cybersecurity aware technologists is only going to grow in need. And waiting for perfect hires, or the Goldilocks hire, as I like to call them, isn't really a strategy. It becomes a bottleneck. So instead of relying on external talent, agencies need to build more from within. And this is beyond filling jobs. It's about future-proofing the IT teams by creating cross-skilled expert generalists who can think across disciplines and adapt to new technologies as they arrive. And it allows them to evolve as quickly as the tech itself evolves while the agencies are trying to get up to speed. So that's, I guess, the way that I see it today.
Okay, so I think we're all familiar with the idea of upskilling and reskilling. Now, you mentioned cross-skilling. Kind of what is cross-skilling and how does that kind of fit into this picture?
So cross-skilling is something that happens naturally with people that are predisposed to it, but it needs to be recognized and clearly identified so we can actually take advantage of it. So here's the difference. Reskilling is when someone trains for an entirely new role, like moving from network admin to cybersecurity teams, for example. Upskilling is about getting better at what you already do, like a developer learning a new language or learning a new framework. Cross-skilling, on the other hand, is about expanding knowledge across disciplines. So you're not just good at one thing, but you can connect the dots across multiple areas. And that's exactly what IT teams in the government need right now in order to be able to keep pace with the way that technology is moving right now. So Most agencies, and in fact, many private sector teams are built very heavily around specialists. And there's a whole other talk track around that I'm not going to go into right now about why. But it's great when things are predictable, but tech isn't predictable anymore. AI and automation and cloud aren't separate silos. They're all becoming much more interconnected with each other. And if teams don't understand those connections, then the work slows down and bottlenecks form because the expertise gets trapped and not communicated between teams. So cross-skilling breaks those bottlenecks. And instead of needing a dedicated expert for every little problem, teams become more self-sufficient. So, for example, cloud engineers who understand cybersecurity, developers who can optimize AI models, and IT administrators who know how to automate as a DevOps would. And the more people that can think across these disciplines, the faster and more effective they become as technology changes. Because it's no longer about knowledge. If we think about it, it used to be about collecting knowledge, but technology is moving too fast to connect deep knowledge all the time in all of these areas. And more importantly, the premium on knowledge has decreased because AI knows things. AI is really good at knowing things and giving you information on demand. But the other thing that AI is good at is it's automating a lot of the repetitive work. And the real value now is knowing how to apply the technology in creative ways rather than proving that you can accumulate all this knowledge. So the agencies that are going to invest in cross-skilling are going to close today's skill gaps, but they're also going to be better positioned for closing tomorrow's skill gaps as well.
Well, let's talk about some of those skill gaps. I know one that, there are a lot of agencies concerned about is with data. How can cross-skilling really kind of help agencies close that gap?
Yeah, this is a really important point, and it's something that there's a couple of interesting solutions here. So, as we've already said, with the advent of AI is really good at data crunching, but I'll come on to more about that in a second. Data isn't becoming a specialist's job anymore. It's at the core of every major technology decision. So if you think about it, cybersecurity, cloud, AI, automation, and software development, every one of those teams interacts with data in some way during their everyday work. The problem is that many agencies still rely on a handful of data specialists to do all of the heavy lifting. Need an analytics report? That's a job for the data team. Need to understand trends in our cyber threats? Let's call the specialist. And it creates bottlenecks, the same bottlenecks that I was referring to earlier. And I think cross-skilling solves this problem by making data fluency a standard skill, not a niche expertise. And it doesn't mean turning every IT professional in your organization into a data scientist. What it means is equipping people with the ability to interpret and apply data in their own context at a level that's sufficient that they can actually have a faster cadence within their day job. So a cyber analyst who understands data modeling can use that data to spot threats faster. A cloud engineer who understands cost analytics can optimize the infrastructure much more effectively than waiting for someone that understands data to come along. And the developer who understands how AI models can work can build smarter, more efficient applications. And here's another really important thing. With local open source LLMs or generative AI tools becoming more accessible, agencies have even fewer barriers to using AI and data securely. So if we think about it, one of the biggest problems we've had is I don't want to take this problem and send it to ChatGPT because my secure data, my customer data is going to the cloud, it's being processed outside and it's no longer safe. With the ability to download something like some of the open source LLMs, like Llama and Deep Thought and DeepThink and things like that, what you end up with is the ability to have a local LLM that can actually do some data crunching for you without it ever leaving the confines of your agency space, which is a huge barrier being removed. So from that perspective, as generative AI continues to reshape how we process and interact with data, agencies that can invest in cross-skilling now will be far ahead of the curve, I think. Instead of just consuming reports, teams are going to be able to generate their own insights and act on that data in real time. And I think that's going to be the difference between a reactive workforce and an agency that sits there waiting for their data specialists to have bandwidth.
Thanks so much, Tony and John. I really appreciate you diving in deep and getting us some good perspectives on the government workforce of the future. One big part of the move to modernize government is the focus on digital services. My colleague Candace Thorson sat down with Granicus's Angie Peterson to talk through what it means to truly be digital first in government in 2025. Here is what Angie had to say.
Government is always evolving to reach people a little faster, whether it's to, keep them safe, keep them informed, keep them aware of their vital services. It used to be, town criers calling out the news or, mail delivering to front, doorsteps, or broadcast media making information instant. And each of those changes, they weren't just about speed, right? They were about delivering on the mission and about meeting people where they are. And for years now, government has really been approaching digital as something much more additive, like adding websites as a digital front door, adding PDFs to a website, adding emails for information sharing in addition to the traditional PR and comms. But digital first is not just additive, it's much more transformative. And it's how government meets people where they are today, on their phones, moving fast, high expectations, right? Wanting to have on-demand services and being able to do it all on their phone. And, so much of that has been about, to date, so much sort of modernization has been about lift and shift and not digital first. But digital first really is about thinking of the entire process end to end and reimagining it to what we think of as remember, remind, and respond, and to really think about how people want to be engaged digitally. And if you can think of how they want to be remembered and reminded and responded to, those are things that are redundant. Those are things that are expensive to do manually. But ultimately, digitally, those are fast and efficient.
So you've mentioned a little bit just now, like why digital first service is so important. But like, for instance, how does it affect necessarily like costs, efficiency, and effectiveness? How does it impact the customer experience? If you could talk a
Sure.
little bit about that.
Sure. So each time a person walks into an organization's office, it costs about $10 to address their issue, right? And when someone picks up the phone to call, it costs about $8 on average per call. Digital interactions, in comparison, are closer to 10 cents, which is a much better return on investment, right? And the US is so big, so expansive. We've got millions of people, millions of unique use cases and service needs. But for the most part, as unique as those are, most people are connected to their devices. Many people are on their devices, and they want to do things quickly online. And they don't really care about the spend on IT. They just want it all to work. So one way to think about measuring success for digital service delivery and improving experience overall, right, is to help people, or to think about helping people become self-sufficient, the self-serve citizen almost, right? And that online self-service portals, accessible web services, all of these are easy ways for people to self-navigate and guide, and have a more positive, intuitive user experience. And having those better experiences builds trust, makes it easier for them to, engage with government, access the services. But it also really does drastically reduce labor and resource costs, right? It can limit the call center volume. It can have less paperwork. It can reduce manual processes. Even better if you can get to those things where like people are, freed of some of those like mundane and administrative tasks. They have, like responding to requests to reset a password or something really, really straightforward. It gives employees space to do the much more like high impact, high value needs, and address those needs that people have. And it's therefore more fulfilling for employees too.
Why do agencies, all different levels, but why do they struggle with digital first services?
Oh gosh, I mean, it just requires so much more than any just one change, right? This is truly a whole organizational mindset and culture shift. It's, organizing websites and information based on the citizen needs, their top tasks, their preferences, and not on departmental, operations or functions. We've talked for a long time about breaking down organizational silos, right? New ways of doing work. And it's not easy. It's not a light switch that you can just flip. But that ultimately that cross-functional, data-driven approach and mindset, that sort of test and iterate approach, it's the key and it's the path to really delivering on the public's, gosh, highly personalized expectations, that digital first delivery, self-sufficient citizen concept, right? Government needs scale and security and flexibility to do that. Um, and it is more than just any one solution. It's a whole new approach and mindset.
Thanks so much, Angie. I really appreciate your digital first approach. It's an entirely new mandate and mindset, so I appreciate you laying out that landscape for us so clearly. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for this session. I want to thank our wonderful speakers for sharing their insights with us today. I also want to note our 2025 NextGen sponsors, Atlassian, Carousel, Pluralsight, and Granicus. We couldn't do this without you. I do have a few quick reminders before we log off this session. Don't forget to fill out your CPE evaluation to get your credit. And if you haven't already, head over to the exhibit hall to check out our amazing booths. They're filled with a wonderful additional information and resources, so don't miss out on a single learning opportunity. Up next, we have our closing keynotes at 3 p.m. Eastern. You can access the sessions in the Sessions tab in the main environment. We'll see you for our closing, and thanks so much for joining. Bye, everybody.